Continuing our update on the recent circuit court decision on the fate of Sullivan's Island Maritime Forest, let's welcome back Sullivan's Island Mayor Patrick O'Neill. It's good to have you back in the studio.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So we are following up on an update. We did have a resident who came in a couple of weeks ago to talk about the circuit court judge's decision. Basically, it preserves the Maritime Forest, but the decision was technically about City Council. So maybe you could clarify that for our audience.
Well, the decision was basically throwing out an earlier agreement from an earlier council to try to resolve an ongoing 12-year-old or older lawsuit. That older council did not have a majority who was in favor of the Maritime Forest. And so they agreed to some pretty substantial cutting of trees throughout the land in exchange for the suit going away, basically.
And I remember when you came on to this program during COVID, everything was virtual, and we were talking about it then, and there were a lot of voices saying, wait a second, we can't just allow all of this cutting to take place. There needs to be some guardrails in place.
There sure were a lot of voices saying that, and they spoke loudly at the polls not long after that. So we now have a different majority on council, and when this majority took office, we decided to go back and try to revisit that decision. So we found some very qualified outside legal expertise, a very experienced attorney who had tried cases similar to this, and we got him to review the record for that case, that judgment, and he concluded that the agreement was probably illegal. And so with that information, we agreed to pursue a course of trying to get it thrown out, and got the same attorney, former Judge Wilkins, to represent us in that effort, and we were successful. We learned just a few weeks ago that the judge had said that the agreement was illegal under the laws of the state of South Carolina.
And clarify for me, what is illegal about what had taken place versus what is now in place?
Well, one big issue was, can one town council bind a future town council and basically tie their hands? And in this particular case, at least, the judge ruled that no, they could not. Now, since that ruling, the other side has filed an appeal asking that the judge reconsider her opinion. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, and when you say we'll see what happens, do we have any kind of a timeline? Is there an expiration date as to when this appeal will either be taken up by the judge, or just does it fizzle out? Does it just go away? What happens then?
Well, there's a time limit as to when you can file an appeal, but they met that limit. They met that requirement. So now it's in the judge's hands, and I don't know that there's any time limitation for the judge.
Okay, and so town council right now, they're saying they're in favor of preserving the Maritime Forest.
Correct.
And so what are we going to see now that that decision has made, while any decision on an appeal is being considered? What do you do moving forward? What does this town council do moving forward? Well,
primarily we need to get a little closure on this most recent appeal. But one thing we're doing is really becoming much more aggressive with how we're going to enforce the current prohibitions on cutting. Unfortunately, we've had some illegal cutting that's taken place at several locations in the Maritime Forest. And remember, this is property that the town owns. This is not owned by the adjacent property owners. This is owned by the town of Sullivan's Island.
So essentially, some homeowners are taking their liberties and cutting down what is not technically theirs.
Somebody's doing it. We don't know exactly who. We've got investigations ongoing. But one thing of note is that we have found a way that we can pursue convictions under felony charges for this. So that could mean a lot of jail time, a fine, and a felony record for someone who's convicted.
Oh, goodness. And so how do you go about policing the Maritime Forest?
Well, we have only so many eyes and ears,
Sure.
But we try to get the most that we can out of them. We listen for reports from residents or visitors. If they see something unlikely going on, that they should report it to us.
Okay.
But again, we have a means of monitoring as well.
Certainly. And just briefly, before we take this to break, if you can just edify our audience as to why a maritime forest is essential to Sullivan's Island and other areas that are similar to that topography.
We're a barrier island, and very few barrier islands on the East Coast are growing. Most are eroding. We're in a very fortunate position in that we're growing, we're accreting. in part because of the jetties that the Corps of Engineers built back in the 1800s.
Oh, goodness.
But as a result, this beachfront property is growing all the time, and the town has title to whatever accretes. A very wise council a number of years ago placed all of that property, now it's about 200 acres or more, under a conservation restriction with the land trust to make certain that it could not be developed. So no one's allowed to go out there and erect any structures or anything else. Over this time, leading up to that and that agreement, and since then, the Maritime Forest has evolved. You know, when the land first arrives, it's beach sand, and then you have small grasses, and then hedges, and then shrubs, and then ultimately trees such as oaks that are growing in the older part of it. It's a very, very rich and unique natural resource. And as a barrier island, it protects the Charleston area.
Indeed. And the residents of Sullivan's Island as well.
Absolutely.
Mayor Patrick O'Neill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate you sharing. We're back after this.